Hello and welcome back to the RevOps Show. Is revenue operations a troubled times discipline? In troubled or quote-unquote war times, is revenue operations something that will aid your company? Coming from a previous episode, What is Customer Experience and What Role Does RevOps Play?, Doug mentioned this statement about RevOps being a wartime discipline. So Jess decided it was time to dig a bit more into what this means and how companies can use this information. There's a lot to digest here, so let's just get into it.
Jess, you came back.
I did come back. I came back.
I wasn't sure. I thought maybe you were just gonna stay on the road with the Backstreet Boys.
Go on tour with the bands. It's funny.
I don't know.
It's funny you bring that up because I'm traveling this weekend, and they're going to be performing in a nearby city, and I seriously considered trying to get tickets.
Are you going?
No.
Are you going?
No, the logistics were too. It was too complicated.
But you have a production background, don't you, Jess?
I do.
So you could actually you could legitimately be a roadie for him, couldn't you?
It would require me to take more days off of work, and that would mean I would miss seeing you. So I chose to not do that.
You might miss a few episodes of the RevOps Show too.
That too. Yep, exactly.
So was it everything you remembered it being?
It was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I can't even tell you. It was everything I wanted it to be and more. So it was worth it. It was worth the time away. It was worth the money. It was worth everything.
So when was the last time you saw them?
1999. December of 1999. So it has been
what?
I think it was the 7th. I don't know.
No,
I don't know.
That's a day that would live in infamy. That's a day that lives in infamy.
I don't know. I don't know what the exact date was, but it was in December of 99.
So you were partying like it's 1999?
I was.
See, I brought a Prince riff into it.
Exactly. It was literally partying like it was 1999.
So are you a Kevin Richardson fan?
I like Kevin, but he's not my favorite. I was always a Brian girl.
Brian. So you're Brian Luttrell.
Yes, I am.
47-year-old doing the same.
From Kentucky, Wildcats fan. So that was always
Kentucky.
Yeah, from Kentucky.
Kevin Richardson, 50 years old.
He is.
So they really are the Backstreet. Are they the Backstreet Men now?
Something like that, yeah. Something like that.
So I would imagine in the 1990s, 80% of the audience was girls.
Oh, probably more than 80%, but yeah. Yes.
So
absolutely.
Did that hold true?
No. So I went with a guy. I went with my best friend, who's a guy. Yeah, let's just let that sit there. And then we were actually commenting on the amount of men that were at the show. We were both surprised at the number of, and I'm sure it was a lot of husbands that got dragged to the show. So, and forced to put on a Backstreet Boys t-shirt from what I saw. Yeah. The poor guy next to me was clearly brought by his wife.
Yeah, I can't imagine actually. That would be. I don't think I could have done it. So kudos.
Kudos to the guy. Kudos to the guy that sat next to me at the Backstreet Boys concert in Dallas. Kudos to you, sir.
He must love his wife.
He must.
Either that or he got into a shit pot of trouble. One of the two.
Because I was excited. The girls behind us were far more excited. Man, were they were screaming and intense. So he got the full experience of a Backstreet Boys concert.
See, actually, outside of just I don't know that I could tolerate just the Backstreet Boys, but then when you put the screaming on top of that,
exactly.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that's Dante's 7th level of hell for me.
I think it is for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's about as bad as it gets. Just have the air conditioning break, and that'll just that would be the Trifecta. Already, Jess, what are we
I
talking
don't
about?
think I don't think we're here to talk about Backstreet Boys for an hour. I mean, I could, but
I'm sure you could. I mean, I figure you can't really talk about the 1975 Red, so I wanted to.
Oh wow, deep cut. All right, so I want to talk about something that came up when we were doing the customer experience episode. You brought up that somebody had said that RevOps is a wartime discipline, and I want to talk about that.
Okay.
I want to start with
Let's talk.
What is that? Thank you. We're off to a great start. What is a wartime discipline? What does that mean? I want to start there for those of us who aren't familiar with the term.
So I'm going to do the easy word first.
Discipline.
So discipline is just a function, right?
Yeah.
So it's a wartime function. There's a, and I want to preface this by saying that there's a part of me that doesn't like this topic from the get-go, because I think sales and business has used wartime analogies for far too long. And outside of the fact that tends to overinflate the existential risk of things, and it also creates win-lose. But from a metaphor standpoint, and it's common, so I'm happy to talk about it. In the pantheon of things I'm not happy to talk about, I'm happy to talk about it. It's not easy being me, Jess. Kermit and I have that in common.
Yep.
So wartime is difficult times, turbulent times, when it's really turbulent. And so typically, like if a business is in trouble, that's wartime. It's actually going to be really, really interesting, because, the last time we saw a macroeconomic environment like we're seeing what appears to be emerging 1999 to 2000. And really, you can go back to, the 70s into the 80s in terms of, to have the level of inflation, which, obviously has gotten a lot of news, but really not since. This is really the first time this century. And yes, everybody, this century, because the year 2000 was part of the 20th century. This is the first time this century that growth businesses are facing a significantly increased interest rate and tightening money environment. We had a very, very, very bad recession in 2008-9 going into 2010. Dubbed the Great Recession, borderline hit some depression type components to it. But the response from the very get-go there was, massive easing of the money supply, and interest rates going to zero. We started to see a blip back up just as interest rates started to emerge, to start coming up. And I think it was like at 0.75 or something like that, which is just historically ridiculous. We then had, March 2020 that put interest rates. We were literally in an interest rate environment where interest rates were zero.
Yeah.
And so there is definitely, more of a headwind. If you think about all the funding, everything that's going on, wartime. So there's this analogy of wartime, peacetime. So there are some people, I'm a good wartime CEO. I'm a good peacetime CEO. The thing that's interesting about wartime, when times are tough, things are actually simpler. Right?
Why do you say that?
So if you're fighting to stay alive,
mm-hmm.
then A, you have fewer choices, and B, the pressure that exists, the external pressure that exists, can be so powerful to overcome other aspects of resistance. So no one likes laying people off. Why do layoffs happen in why do they suddenly happen in more difficult times? Well, if it's a difference of staying in business or going out of business, as much as I don't like doing something, it becomes easier to do that. You really, in a lot of ways, choices, because you have fewer choices, because you're in, you're much more have to. Then there's another element, I remember when I started in business, I didn't have a lot of choices. I also didn't have a lot to lose. And I remember thinking, well, when I just get to $1 million of revenue, then everything will be fine. Except you got to $1 million of revenue, and suddenly it was like, well, nothing's any clearer. But now if I make a mistake, I could fall. Right. So if we're in really difficult times and our revenue's down 25%, et cetera, it's like, okay, well, I can't make it much worse, can I? When times are good, you have more choices. There's so the idea of, so a wartime discipline, a wartime function, a wartime mentality is dealing with very turbulent, very difficult, bad times. When there is existential risk on the line, when you're trying to rally your team in some ways, if it's like, hey, we need to do this or we won't exist, you'll tend to get, it tends to be easier to rally.
Yep.
Now, you're also dealing with a whole lot of fear. There's all, I'm not saying wartime makes life easier. There's a lot of things that make it tougher, but it's simpler.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So the comment that you made was that you didn't agree with the fact that RevOps is a wartime discipline. You said that's only the case when an organization is in trouble. Is that because you can't be?
I said if you're treating RevOps as a wartime discipline, then your organization is in trouble.
You might have said that as well, but
okay.
I did go to the tape. I'm fairly certain that you said that's
okay. That's possible too.
When an organization is in trouble, and is that because you can't really be a wartime discipline, quote unquote, unless you're in that turbulent environment, unless the organization is in trouble? Or
well, first off, actually, I was about to run into a first off, and then I actually thought before I started speaking, what's going on, Jess?
I don't know.
I used to be a much better wartime leader, for lack of a better word, wartime manager than I was a peacetime manager. Like I went through, it was probably, and I'm still adjusting to it, but it was probably a good 2-year adjustment where I had to get used to the idea that, wait, key audiences are treating us credibly. We've earned their respect. Like, so I'm so used, my entire life has been spent being told, that I didn't belong certain places. So, or that I wouldn't be able to do certain things. So, it was pursuing that. And, once we started getting into a place where, we were doing things right. And, me closely, it's like as much energy as it eats, and it is harder to do today than it used to be. When the shit is hitting the fan and everything is going crazy and there's an, oh no.
Yeah.
That's where I thrive. Right. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of fear, a lot of everything. And I can kind of get dialed in and so when things were good and peaceful and you had choice, you can't really, Newt Rockney's speech, halftime speech or pregame speech. I can't remember whether it was halftime or pregame, wasn't, in a, hey, everything's good, let's keep going. It's like,
yeah,
you gotta, So I think that there are people and there are organizations that have wartime mentalities. And I think when you're a wartime, so I'm gonna equate it to baseball. Billy Martin was a great wartime manager in baseball. If you had a team that was underperforming, or you had a very young team that needed the shock and discipline to get to the point of performing, Billy Martin was a great manager, and he was notorious for getting to the playoffs and not getting through the playoffs and getting fired. And the difficulty is that, wartime managers, they suck up a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And once they get, and the wartime mentality can only last so long. You could only be under crisis for so long. That was the interesting element about, the 2008 recession was, it really was 2008 to 2011 before things started to, and actually 2012, No, 2011. Sorry, I'm getting it. It's all coming back to me. 2008 to, 2011 is when it finally started to come back and things began to emerge, but it never got really kicked into full gear. You couldn't, even though there were a lot of elements that were still very recessionary, you couldn't still operate a business from that standpoint because it just, it burns so much in the process. So when you're a wartime CEO and, I'm going blank on his name. Ben Horowitz. I think it's Ben Horowitz. Yes, Ben Horowitz. One of the limited partners with Andreessen Horowitz. He wrote the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Venture guys, et cetera. But it was actually in that where, he had a really good take about wartime, peacetime. Very often, you have a CEO that's a wartime CEO, and now, okay, you've got it turned around. Okay, they're a wartime CEO. They're not really, they're not going to thrive in this environment. So if you're saying that RevOps, so almost by definition, if RevOps is going to be a wartime discipline, then if you're bringing a wartime discipline, and by the way, I think that it gets treated that way, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but you're not in wartime, then you're going to fall into, a number of the mistakes that we talked about in our 5 common RevOps mistakes.
So why does it get treated as a wartime discipline?
Because I think that there's an aspect about, so I had an interview earlier today, and the question was, when is it the right time to initiate RevOps? And so my first answer was, the question is moot because you already have initiated RevOps.
Right.
RevOps is happening whether you are aware of it or not, whether you have somebody responsible for it or not. I said, so I think the question that you intend here is not when do you initiate RevOps, it's when do you formally begin to address RevOps? When do you call it out as a major part of someone's job description, someone's responsibilities, OKRs? When do you begin to build out a formal revenue operations function? For those interested, we did so that I won't go into the full answer of when is it the wrong time to start RevOps. We did a whole episode on, shared some, without giving anything away, but shared some details about a client relationship where we were hired for RevOps and it really wasn't the right thing. And so, that I'm obsessed about the idea of the difference between speed and velocity. Right.
Yep.
And so, RevOps at the end of the day is about managing chaos. Now, you'll notice, I just want to lay down, because we might come back to this, my keyword there is managing chaos. So when you start off, when you're one person, and you'll recall we had a conversation with somebody that, I actually said, so you're telling me that you have 3 people in a company, and the basic response was, one person should be responsible for RevOps. And my response to them was, well, how much chaos can you have? And having been involved in 3-person companies before, I will acknowledge that you can actually have a lot of chaos. With 3 people.
Yeah.
But the acid test question is, okay, well, how much juice can you get for solving the chaos of 3 people? Right. They might have lots of chaos. What's interesting about the chaos of 3 people is that it's non-sustainable chaos. It is the chaos of only 3.
Yeah.
There is no structure. There is no component. And so if you try to bring in structure to a 3-person company, you'll have an average 3-person company, and an average 3-person company probably won't provide for 3 people for very long.
Yep.
And if it does, it will provide for them. It won't, they would be better off doing other things if we were to look at it from an economic standpoint. So RevOps doesn't, my answer was, at that point where you are going faster, you are doing more, and it's not translating to velocity.
Yeah.
Right. When you start, the increased force side of the play selection, it's necessary. You've got to do it to get to a critical mass, but especially if you're focusing on that exclusively or nearly exclusively, you hit a point of diminishing returns. ideally at that point where you begin to get the diminishing returns for do more, do it better, that's the time where RevOps begins to shine. And that means that there is a lot of friction, there is a lot of turbulence, there is a lot of confusion, there is a lot of chaos. And so revenue operations becomes valuable and becomes meaningful and becomes critical when there is a lot of turbulence. Now, I think that we've got to be careful, because I did say that wartime account, one of the elements is turbulent times. There's turbulence and there's turbulent times, right? If you're in a plane, turbulence is a natural part of what's happening in the air. As a matter of fact, from what I understand, if there is zero turbulence, I'm not saying that a plane shouldn't try to avoid it, but if there's no turbulence in the air, then that's actually a problem. It would be like there are no waves in the ocean.
Right.
That is different than we are in, the atmosphere is turbulent. So I think where the idea, and given the context of this conversation, I actually wish we had this, because I might have reframed what I shared a little bit more eloquently, is turbulence and wartime don't mean the same thing. And it is easy to approach revenue operations from the standpoint of existential risk, from the standpoint of wartime. And by the way, when you're trying to get change, right, which typically, when do you bring in revenue operations? If someone says, hey, everything is performing at or above expectations, we are knocking the cover off the ball, things have never been better, we have never been happier.
Right.
What's the likelihood that that's the time that an organization is going to introduce revenue operations?
Yeah, it's gonna be low. Yeah.
Or introduce any other kind of change. And so, when you're trying to introduce change, your natural point, you're trying to highlight, why do we need to change? And again, it's a lot easier to say, if we don't change, we will fail. Right. And so you begin to manufacture failure. Now, I grew up a Redskins fan, and Joe Gibbs was the coach for my formative years. And one of the things that I think Joe Gibbs, while he was, he had a great football mind, I think what he understood better than anything else was people. In the Redskins' best years, the Tony Kornheiser used to joke about how Joe Gibbs would always be able to manufacture with a straight face the angle of, if we don't execute to our ability, we will lose. Michael Jordan had a unique ability to, in every situation, find some reason to be angry, to be truly angry with the person that he was playing against, right? Because it is easier to get that extra pulse when you're in wartime. But if you start applying wartime mentality in non-wartime, then you'll wreak havoc on the business. And here's what I'll, this gets, I think, to the heart of it. If you're in wartime, then you can't play with the same playbook. So revenue operations at its best is a good to great discipline. You give me a company in trouble, and a company versus a company that's got, that's in good shape, that things are going well, and they're just not getting to that, they're not getting to scale. You put revenue operations in both of those, the good company will get far more from that effort. And it will be far more attuned, because, by the way, what is so much of especially strategic revenue operations about? It's about optimization, right? We're optimizing. Well, if you're in trouble, please, for the love of God, do not worry about optimizing.
But if your roles,
we're trying to lower our customer acquisition cost by 23% because we want to get it to this. And oh, really? Well, you're in trouble. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you're in trouble, optimizing your customer acquisition cost, probably not the top thing on your list, or at least it probably shouldn't be.
But I want to go back to the managing chaos, because if that seems a little bit counter to what you said about RevOps' job being to manage chaos, because you would think if if the job is to manage chaos and there's more chaos, I would be more successful in a more chaotic environment than I would in a less chaotic environment. So I would be more successful in a place that was in trouble or in wartime than not.
What is chaos?
A lack of order or regular arrangement, according to Google.
Behavior so unpredictable as to appear random, owing to great sensitivity to small changes in condition, complete disorder and confusion, the formless matter supposed to have existed before the creation of the universe. These are 3 definitions. I think there's different types of chaos.
Okay.
I think when you're in trouble, I'll reemphasize this. I think things are simpler when you're in trouble. I think things are more complex when you're not in trouble, when you're in good shape. So maybe maybe the more accurate statement is that RevOps' job is to manage complexity. And remember, complexity is different than complicated. Complicated and complex are not the same thing. If a business is in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
I get to enforce things around you have to.
Yeah.
When a business is good, you don't have the have to, right? If a business is in trouble and someone's not on board, you don't have time to go, well, do they have a point?
Yeah.
Because if you spend your time thinking about when you're in trouble, you don't want yes men. But the funny thing is, when you're in trouble, I don't know. Well, I don't know. Never mind. I'm just going to say you don't have as many yes men, but you do have an environment that's telling, that's giving you feedback that, something's not right. But also, when you're in trouble, when you're in wartime, the odds are stacked against you. You are fighting for your existence. And so in many ways, certainty of action is more important than the optimization of. We've talked in episode after episode after episode about trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in trouble, the trade-offs tend to be more clear. There are times, Jess, when I have made lots of calls,
mm-hmm.
and I've acted like I'm a SDR,
right?
And I always like to do some of that because I want to keep my skills. I want to make sure that I don't fall into theory too much, etc. But I can tell you, when I'm, working as a sales rep 5 days a week, that is not because I want to. Right. But I don't have the choice. Right. So where do we allocate that? How do we do this? So I actually think that there, especially when you're talking about a company that is scaling up, and so they're going through, so they're growing through their inflection points. They're growing through consolidation points. There is a lot of chaos to then, get things back in order, to manage the complexity of growth, keep things in order so that they can sustain. That is a very, very chaotic environment. If the sales team isn't hitting numbers, if we're not generating enough revenue, look, I don't think it's smart to cut your way to success. But if our expenses are 20% above our revenue,
mm-hmm.
do you know what I know you have to do?
You have to cut.
You have to cut.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing that's interesting. Why do all the cuts come when you hit hard times? Should you be cutting along the way? Hey, damn right you should be cutting. Right? Hey, our goal in good times is we want to get fat. No, you don't want to get fat, but it's harder to tell. The opportunity cost. You know what? Hey, if this group isn't performing optimally, but we think it's got the, an opportunity from a long-term standpoint here, here, there, whatever, when you're in good times, your viewpoint should, your time horizon should lift up. I've been in an environment where I wasn't, on, 5 days before paychecks were due, we didn't have payroll.
Yeah.
I've been there. Right.
So have I.
And I can tell you, when I'm there, I'm not overly focused on what do we need to do to make sure we're in a position to be successful in 18 months?
Right.
Right. And so the call in your revenue facing areas in difficult times, I'm not saying there's not a revenue operations role there, because there's still a machine that's got to be run. There's still things that are going on, but if your business is in trouble, I mean, so one question is your business in trouble because of the environment? Or is your business in trouble because of something specific to your business?
Right.
And by the way, even in a very difficult macro and economic environment, there's still a lot of, okay, what's going on with you? And so my question is revenue operations the discipline? Is it the number one discipline? Is it hey, we got to get our revenue operations in shape or we're not going to turn around?
And you're talking about if you're in that wartime mode, if you're
in wartime, right? And by the way, when you're in wartime, you got to telescope, right? When you're in trouble, you got to telescope. You got to be focused on what are the critical things.
Yep. And
so, if is your product, do you still have product fit? Do you still have product market fit? Is, where is your positioning? What's your back end? There's all kinds of things. Like, I don't know what, why are you in trouble?
Yeah.
But trade-offs are not, I mean, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
When you're fighting for, food and shelter, and by the way, if you're fighting for food and shelter, what will you not do? And I mean, if you're really, really fighting for food or shelter, you ever watch Walking Dead?
I have.
Is it appropriate that they break into people's houses and live there and squat?
I don't think so. Kidding.
And they go through everyone's cabinets and ransack for food and right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, you know what? If that's what I'm fighting for, all of a sudden, and obviously, I'm having a little fun talking about that, but you do what you have to do, right? Self-actualization. Well, what do we want to be? What could we be?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring that up to the Walking Dead analogy, because this gets to one of the questions I was going to ask, which is, and you kind of said this about managing chaos, but RevOps job's a little bit to bring and maintain order. But if you're in trouble, that might not be the most immediate need at the moment.
Well, so tell me more about what you're saying there. The RevOps job is to manage and maintain order.
So in my mind, that goes to optimization. So my job, the RevOps job, is to make sure that we're able to find places where we can work more efficiently, effectively. We can create processes around repeatable processes, those types of things. RevOps role is to find places where you reduce friction in a way where you can work more efficiently. And I'm thinking, from what I'm hearing from you, is if you're in trouble, that might not always be the thing that you need to focus on right at that moment. And actually could cause issues more than help.
Well, the danger that I have is when someone says to manage order, to create and manage order, and maybe I'm wrong, but my sense is the picture that people have is the house is clean, the groceries are all put away, the pantry is neatly organized, everything has a place and everything is in its place, and right. But I don't know any company that's actually doing anything that matters. That if you were to talk to the people that were there, that especially in today's world, that's what they would experience. If you remember, I called out that the keyword was managing right. Chaos. I did not say eliminate chaos. Right. And I'll go so far as to say this: if you eliminate chaos, I think you are more likely than not going to eliminate the, whatever the secret sauce, whatever whatever, fire is fire. Fire is fire. And what do we want to do? We want to catch fire, right? Isn't that what they say? We want to catch fire.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
what they say.
I always say, like, I never know when times are going really well, I never know if the do I have the tiger's tail or does it have me chasing its tail? Right. I'm
Yes,
not sure whether I caught its tail or it caught me.
Yeah,
right?
it took me a minute. Yeah.
I mean, and think about it, like where we have started to see some real optimization and things come about. There's almost okay, wait a second, this worked out like it was supposed to. But
right.
Because by the way, especially when you're in a complex environment, then and let's add you're in a dynamic complex environment.
Mm-hmm.
If you have this orderly mentality, then that actually becomes complacency, because if you're not constantly testing, constantly experimenting, tweaking, adjusting, figuring out, and you go, okay, yep, already, hey everybody, we got the formula. It's like when I coached baseball and someone would come and say to me, coach, got my swing, I got my swing figured out. I'd be like, okay, I don't know what he's done, but I know he hasn't figured out his swing. Right. And it's why if you ever watch a hitter that's hitting the ball well, you know what he will or she will not talk about? They will not talk about their swing. Right. They will not do it. And that's because it's never done.
Right.
Right. So is it orderly? Is it and look, in any environment, especially where we are today, there's always like the dangers are always more evident. And so if your goal is to eliminate chaos, then and as we've said in other places, if your goal is to eliminate friction,
right,
then you eliminate, and you don't, how do you know whether you're eliminating the friction that's good or that's not good? Survival is not it's not a big trade-off, right? We have to do this.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you said something that struck me, because I know I've said this. Revenue operations job is to find places I think revenue operations job is to participate in that, because I believe revenue operations should be a peer role.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why you need to have strategic revenue operations. It would be a mistake to have only tactical revenue operations and have that in a peer role. Mm-hmm. But I actually think what revenue operations job is to figure out how to standardize without losing fidelity. Like, that's the trade-off. How do we balance the fidelity of one-off, the fidelity of bespoke, with the scalability of standard?
Yep.
Right. And realizing, we can't be bespoke. We can't be, we're not a linear machine. Right. But that's the place where, so it is a standardizing, in the same way that, when you're starting out in sales, if you just go out and hire a bunch of salespeople, you're not going to get the results that you want, because they're not the people that have the ability to explore the conversation, to figure out how to get some message fit, etc. Salespeople come in and they are, they exploit what is known. And that's why you hire more salespeople, because you generate more capacity, etc. And so, revenue operations has that ability to scale your backstage and support functions. That's what it does, right? And so again, when does reducing friction really matter? When there's enough force, right? You've got, think of it this way. If you started working to eliminate friction when you're trying to get a rocket into space, you're not going to get very far. You have to figure out how to get through friction. You've got to break gravity, right? So when you're in trouble, you've got a gravitational pull, right? You got a gravitational pull down. So you've got to go against that gravity. What is bringing you down? You need to figure out what that is and do what needs to be done to fix that. And by the way, that might mean that you need to do some things that aren't going to be the healthiest long-term. When we start off, what has become common, it shouldn't scale.
Right.
Right. If you've just started off and you're like, okay, well, I've got 5 customers. Oh, but that won't work once we have 10,000 customers. Okay, great. You know what? You don't have 10,000 customers. Right. Right. And by the way, if you don't get 100 customers, you're never going to,
right.
And so you can't, if you're in trouble, if you have a share, a true sales shortfall, if your revenue is threatening, well, you know what? You need revenue. And what does that mean? Like for us today, our minimums are higher.
Yep.
We're much more selective.
Yep.
Right. If we were to run into some trouble, if demand were to fall off. Now, by the way, some of the reasons why we're more selective and our minimums are higher is because we have a limited amount of capacity. And so, we've got to figure out where it fits. And if demand levels fell, well, then guess what? Our capacity wouldn't be at its limit. So again, you're adjusting things that are there.
Right.
Today, we're less likely to do something custom. And if it is custom, and I mean bespoke type custom, then we're going to charge much more for that.
Right.
Right. And you know what? There could come a time where we run into something and it's like, okay, hey, guess what? Is that like, so those are all kind of the games that happen. I don't know that I would call that, when revenue operations is perceived as a wartime discipline, they speak with certainty and they approach things with certainty that makes them the Department of Sales Prevention, right? And you can't help but become maniacally focused on process rather than on throughput and yield. And again, the reduced friction part, if I have 10 conversations, how much juice can you get for reducing the friction? Hey, we're going to bring you, but 5 of your conversations are a complete waste of time. So we're going to bring you down to 5, but they're the 5 conversations that matter. Okay, great. Well, the 4 sets your ceiling.
Right.
And so I think that, and by the way, I know I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but I've seen people that then jump in and start saying, as a matter of fact, I know somebody that would have argued with something that I said. I talked about, where's your positioning, product market fit? And they would say, well, that's RevOps. And then I would say, no, it's not. Right. And if it is RevOps, then I want to know, why weren't you talking about it 10 years ago when you were talking about messaging, et cetera? Because it's either new or it's not new. And we've had the conversations of it has to mean something.
Right.
So revenue operations is about organizing. It's an organizing discipline. It's about increasing predictability. Those are all things that are of strong health, right? And so if I'm drowning, the last thing I need is someone to talk to me about form for my freestyle.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I was out in Hawaii, Jess, did I mention I was in Hawaii recently?
You've mentioned it once or twice.
I went out one day and holy cow, was the tide strong. Holy moly. And of course I forget that I don't have whatever the lifeguard certification is. And I got out a little bit deeper than I thought I was. And I got like mashed around by some waves. And I remember thinking, this is why people who know how to swim drown. And what I did was I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to the basics and I'm going to do, it was basically, what do I have to do to get to the place where I can stand, and everything got really, really simple.
Yep.
And then I'll figure out everything else and I'll get the sand out of my, what, and this and that, right? I'll deal with all that later. I didn't, so that's what I'm talking about. And so if you're coming in, if you're approaching revenue operations with that wartime mentality, then you're taking agency away. You're taking refinement away, and you're going to end up, in a wartime environment. It is adversarial, right? You are with us or you are against us, And look, I don't want to. This is why I hate talking about wartime, but if you're Ukrainian, there's a whole lot of nuance of discussion that is just not relevant.
Right.
Right. Well, what's the impact of this decision 20 years from today? I'm sorry, we're worried about tomorrow.
Right.
Right. And what is the zone? What is the zone of revenue operations? It's a zone 2 discipline.
Right.
That zone 2 is at its best going, that's what gets you from good to great. Zone 2 doesn't get you, I mean, there's zone 2 behaviors and activities, but zone 2 is not the zone that gets you out of trouble. And so,
go ahead.
And by the way, if you're in wartime, if you're in difficult times, then the company is wartime. And that, I guess this is my last piece of why it really bothered me. If the company is in peacetime and you're treating revenue operations like it's a wartime discipline, well, you're out of alignment with your company, and that's going to wreak a lot of havoc. And you're going to burn. By the way, what's interesting is you might actually get better results in the short term.
Yeah.
That wartime mentality will get you better immediate outcomes, but the cost will be too high.
Just real quick, I want to ask you, because the way that you're talking about this, does RevOps not have, so if you are in trouble, if you are in wartime, does RevOps not have a role there? And what is the role?
Let me say this. If you're in trouble and you don't have a revenue operations organization, is that when I'm going to introduce revenue operations? Probably not.
No.
It goes to, the episode that we had. You need to have a sales. You need to have somebody who's like, their problem was there was nobody that owned sales, right? They needed a sales leader to own sales, right? It was like, until you have that, because the other thing too is what revenue operations does is it brings constructive tension. So what is it balancing against? Now, is there a role? Yeah, there's a role, because there's still, again, there's an operations, there's things that are going on. You're still looking to get stuff out of it. But again, as I'm saying this out loud more, the idea of wartime, that is an organizational issue. That is not a discipline issue.
Yeah.
So if the organization is in wartime, if the organization is in trouble, then the mandate of revenue operations is going to be very, very different than if it's not. And I do think that you're probably looking, RevOps will get much more tactical.
So I think that's my big takeaway, is that this is more of an organizational thing than a discipline or departmental even. When you're in wartime or the organization's in trouble. I also think I like the point that you made. We've talked about this on several episodes about the danger of RevOps becoming the sales prevention department, or really what the whatever prevention department. And if you're viewing it that way, that's going to happen.
I'll give you one more takeaway, because I think one of the problems that happens, and this is why wartime gets used so frequently, is I think too many people still see the opening of Patton comes to mind when they think wartime. Here's how I would make the synonym of wartime: trouble.
Yeah.
Right. And so I would ask you, is revenue operations a trouble time discipline? So I would ask the person who posted that, is revenue operations trouble time discipline? And again, remember, one of the things about wartime is there's no, when you're on the front lines, you don't have a choice.
Right.
Right. So you're taking away choice. And by the way, all you have to do is watch people who spent time in war and see the cost that it has.
Yeah.
And so now the upside of wartime, it can be very clarifying. Life gets very, very clear when your survival is at stake. And by the way, you don't get into nuance about the person next to you. It's like you have my back or you don't have my back. It's that simple.
Well, and on the choice thing,
that's where we glorify wartime. And in the word of the great poet, I ask you, war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Sorry, good old.
No. I was just gonna say on the point about choice. I mean, we've also talked frequently on here that RevOps is all about managing trade-offs, and that's actually the place where they're strongest, is when they're managing those trade-offs. And when you take the choice away, you're not in that position where you're managing those, because you have to do what you have to do. In trouble times, RevOps becomes everything that we say RevOps shouldn't be. It becomes about compliance. It becomes about, did we do this the way we're supposed to do it? It becomes about, now if you have a revenue operations issue because you're selling medical equipment related to HIPAA and
and there's certain contracts, and you're violating those contracts, and you just got fined, and so you're bringing in revenue operations to pay attention to that, then that is a wartime issue that you're. But here's my question, right? And here's the other thing about war and about troubled times. If you survive, you're going to have more time when you're not in war than you are in war. So what are you going to do then? So if there is a major trouble that you're fixing, okay, that's great. You got to do those things, get that in shape. Mm-hmm. But now that, we are compliant with our contracts, and you know what? There are some roles where they come into existence because there is a defined acute problem that needs to be solved. And when that problem is solved, that role should go away. And that's okay. Like that. And by the way, if that's then that's fine. But I know the person who wrote that post and where that comes, that's not what they're thinking.
Right.
And I wish we had this conversation before. When is it the right time to introduce revenue operations? When you're overwhelmed by choice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's much more nuance to that, and I'll find those places, but that is when revenue operations becomes, that is when revenue operations becomes imperative. It's because choice means complexity. Complexity is the toxin of growth. So as you're taking on more and more complexity, what does revenue operations do? Revenue operations is managing that market-facing complexity on an ongoing basis so that you're not overwhelmed by it. And again, in most cases, if you are in trouble, it might have been too many choices that got you into trouble. You got parallels or overwhelmed, or you got too complicated, or you overextended, etc. But to get turned around, it's not, the managing of choices. It's more the execution of those choices.
Yep.
And that's all I got to say about that.
On that topic that you didn't really like.
Well, I don't like the analogy.
No, I know.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. Even though this wasn't a fan favorite topic of Doug's, I think he hit the nail on the head with the reminder that RevOps is an organizing discipline that's used to increase predictability and create constructive tension. So whether you're in troubled times or not, that's how RevOps should be used. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to go subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and share the episode. If you have any questions you would like to ask Doug or Jess about troubled times or anything RevOps related, email me at hannah@imaginellc.com or hit us up on Twitter @demandcreator. Until next time, remember, you can't solve your upstream problems downstream.